Star Citizen is about to get a truly next level update to its tractor beam feature that's going to do a lot more than just allow you to physically remove components from ships. It's going to open up a whole new facet to PvP and PvE with resupply gameplay, lead to better, more valuable salvage and piracy, and will even get us a small way towards legitimately interesting ship maintenance and repair. Like any new feature though, it doesn't come without its own potential issues. So spool up that quantum drive with me as I break down this awesome new feature and go over its possible issues. And if you think I did a good job by the end and you think I deserve it, don't forget to hit that like and subscribe button to show your support. Since the tractor beam was added many years ago, it's become an absolute must-have for any Star Citizen adventurer going out for some day-to-day gameplay. You can use it to pull yourself along in 0G, pick up heavy or light boxes, miscellaneous items like guns, or even bodies to make looting a lot easier. Now though, it's going to get an upgrade for the next update. It seems that they're looking to add a lot more variation to the tool, giving us a larger and better version of the attachment that can grab more weight, and eventually a more dedicated larger variant that will be capable of lifting a lot more than just a single SCU box. I'm not sure if it's going to be able to shake around a ship like this, but it's going to be able to lift pretty big stuff. How it works, I have no idea. The only thing that I'm interested in is whether or not it makes gameplay more interesting, and I think it will. This in itself leads to some pretty interesting gameplay possibilities, like being able to exceed the current force limitations, which allows you to effectively pull yourself along outside of a moving ship, acting as a grappling hook. But more exciting and interesting than this, though, is what's in the next major patch, 3.19. Star Citizen is looking to add the ability for you to finally be able to remove components and weapons from ships with the handheld tractor beam, and it's a really big deal. In this first iteration, at the very least, we're going to be able to physically detach and replace internal components like shields, power plants, coolers, up from 0 to size 2, and even larger components later when we get the bigger tractor beam. We'll also be able to detach weapons from size 1 to 6 and be able to replace them on the fly in addition to torpedoes and missiles. Now at first glance it might seem like this is going to be a rather small change, but that's why I wanted to make this video, because this is going to be a lot bigger of a deal than I think some people are giving it credit for. In my view, this update will completely transform the way player versus player and player versus environment activities go, and here's why. Let's start with resupply gameplay. Let me give you some really interesting scenarios that could be directly applied when this update drops. At the moment, for example, your ballistic weapons are the most powerful that you can currently use, but they have a serious limitation, and that's a really small pool of ammunition. With this new feature, you could have a member of your org stock up on full ballistic weapons in preparation for restocking fighters with ballistics in a sort of pit stop style resupply near the battle, like for example near Jumptown or Security Post Korea or the Nine Tails Lockdown or even the Xenothreat event, which is player versus environment. But that doesn't stop with just ballistic weapons. Missiles and torpedoes too can be replaced. One of the most serious limitations of torpedoes right now is that you just get a few of them really, unless you've got the Retaliator, and even then you're only getting a limited supply. Now you can restock them in the field if you've got a resupply ship ready to go nearby. You can imagine then having a bunch of size 9s ready to go and restock your Eclipse with so you can get back into the fight and blow up that Idris or other player ships. The same also then applies for ground vehicles like the Ballista. One of the most serious issues with the Ballista is that even though it's good at area denial, you run out of missiles and torpedoes very quickly. So up until right now, you would need a Hercules to be able to bring it back to a station or to an outpost in order to restock it, which is quite troublesome and time-consuming, and it also leaves a window for somebody to come in and try to retake that area. Unless you've got multiple ballistas, then you've got to juggle those as well, especially if they all run out simultaneously. Now, all you need to do is have a ship large enough to carry torpedoes to restock it with, like a bog standard Cutlass Black, or you might even just leave them beside the vehicle for the gunner to restock themselves. There are also non-combat applications to this, such as with mining, and they even showed this in the video. With this update, you'll be able to swap out mining heads on the fly, as well as their subcomponents, which are ultimately consumables. They basically run out and you have to replace them at a station. Now, you don't. You just have them in your inventory and you swap them out with your tractor beam tool. How cool is that? It's going to make a huge difference for players who like doing the mining gameplay loop. Repair gameplay too is going to get a bit of an addition. Now it's not just going to be missiles and weapons that can be replaced, but components too, so you'll be able to replace damaged components on the fly if you've got a spare one on hand, or if you're able to pick one up off of a ship that you've just blown up. And that leads me to salvage and pirating. Weapons and components can be incredibly expensive. Size 2 ship components can go for tens of thousands of UEC, and weapons like size 6s can go north of 100k. With this new feature, you're now going to be incentivized to actually loot the ships that you blow up, whether they be players or non-players like NPCs, or just wrecks that you find while you're salvaging. And it's going to incentivize now pirates to not blow ships up, because they're going to want to make sure that all of those components are still intact when they board the ship. So yeah, I know you're going to get pirated more often, but I personally think that might be more engaging gameplay than just going poof. All of this then stands to further expand and enrich the existing gameplay we have right now, in addition to introducing a whole new logistics loop that we might be able to call Resupply Tier 0. But as you might imagine, it's not without a few potential issues that CIG are going to have to address before this gets into our hands, and luckily, they already started thinking about them. Like, for example, they are aware that this could create an issue where your ship gets stripped when you call it out onto a pad. Luckily, they're going to also introduce a new locking system for components, which will only be able to be deactivated at the helm of the ship or after the ship goes into soft death or explodes. But I would say there are quite a few more considerable issues that they'll also have to address. For example, not all the ships are currently gold standard, which is to say that not all ships have their physical components in an accessible location. CIG has been making an effort to gold standard priority ships for Squadron 42, but there are still a good deal of ships that have been left outdated. Ships like the F-7C, Constellation, Gladiator, Hurricane, Arrow, and many, many more don't have component hatches, which means their internal components won't be able to be physically replaceable or salvageable in this update. CIG thankfully did acknowledge this, but they didn't really talk about how the problem is going to be solved other than just hard work over the next, 10 years or whatever it takes for them to gold standard ships. And then there's the janky physics system in Star Citizen. If you don't know, if you just put loose items in your ship's cargo hold, your ship has a tendency to randomly explode. Having large weapons and components just sitting loosely in your cargo hold then might lead to some pretty frustrating conclusions after a really big haul. This one seems like a really tough issue because physics are a much more difficult nut to crack. I don't know if maybe they could instead do something that's a bit of a halfway thing where they allow you to maybe store these things on an internal inventory a la the UI system we currently have for smaller items. That might be one potential way to do it. Or they might also just introduce some cargo boxes that we put on the cargo grid itself where we could deposit things like missiles and ship weapons, which will be maybe a more convenient way to transport them, but that might even take some more additional work. Finally, they could maybe make them snap to the cargo grids, but again, I don't know how this would work, and that's really up for them to solve. Then there's also the issue of hot swapping components. What happens when you hot swap a power generator or a shield generator while in combat? It would make sense for them to just be powered off by default, but if not, then, well, it might create an issue where you could just keep having shields. So this means that they're going to have to address this with a code to make sure that those weapons and components are turned off by default so that you can't just cheese it and basically take advantage of the system. Then there's the selling of the components. How are we going to sell them? Can we sell them directly from our ship's cargo hold, or do we have to put them in the station cargo? And if we do that, how do we drag them over there? There's a lot of questions here. It sounds quite troublesome and clunky, so I think the best way is probably for them to allow us to drag it into inventories, but again, that requires some work by CIG. Then there's the components and weapons themselves. How are players meant to recognize them at all? There's no UI element built into the game right now to allow us to understand what we're looking at, so that's also something that they're going to have to consider to just make it easier to use. Finally, and most significant of all the issues here are some of the issues with the existing ship designs. There are some ships in the game that have their component access in some pretty difficult to reach locations where the component itself wouldn't fit through the hallways, doors, or lifts that you'd have to take them through to replace them physically. Ships like the Carrack and Hammerhead have this issue. So how are we going to replace those parts physically or salvage them when the ship, shuts down or goes into soft death? Clearly then, there are a lot of issues and potential problems for them to solve, when this update goes to live. I personally, though, am still really excited for them regardless of whatever problems they're going to face, because even in its most basic form, it's going to set up a lot of more interesting gameplay for my org to do resupply missions to help with big events and things that we set up ourselves. But what do you think? Is there something that I didn't talk about that you think that they should also address before we get into that? Related to this, not the game. Yeah, there's a lot of stuff not done yet. And have you thought of any other cool uses for the new swapping feature, like maybe swapping out guns mid-fight? That could be kind of fun and interesting. But whatever it is, join the discussion down below. I want to know your thoughts and opinions on this. And as always, if you like this video and you want to see more, you know what to do. Also, if you don't know, I'm also on TikTok now, as well as on Twitch, so if you guys want to watch me live or just check out some shorts, you can check me out over there. Links in the description. Thanks for the support.